Life is not a static thing. The only people who do not change their minds are incompetents in asylums who can't and those in cemeteries. Everett Dirksen considered the sound of a footstep. If I asked you, what does a footstep mean, you would probably answer, it doesn't mean anything to me. Well, let's think about that. If you're walking along a busy street, there are so many footsteps you don't even hear them. In that situation, they don't have any effective meaning. But what if you're sitting home alone late at night, and you hear footsteps downstairs? A moment later, you hear the steps moving toward you. Do the footsteps have meaning then? They sure do. That same signal, the sound of footsteps, will have many different meanings depending upon what it has meant to you in similar situations in the past. Your past experience may provide you with the context for that signal and thus determine whether it relaxes or frightens you. For example, you may classify the sound as that of your spouse coming home early. People who have experienced a burglary may think it means an intruder. Thus, the meaning of any experience in life depends upon the frame we put around it. If you change the frame, the context, the meaning changes instantly. One of the most effective tools for personal change is learning how to put the best frames on any experience. This process is called reframing. On a piece of paper, describe the figure below. What do you see? There are many things you could see. You might see what you consider to be a hat on its side, a monster, an arrow pointing down, and so on. Describe to yourself what you see right now. Do you also see the word fly? You may have seen it right away because this example has been used for bumper stickers and other promotional items. So your previous frame of reference helped you to see it as fly immediately. If you didn't see it, why didn't you? Do you even see it now? If you didn't see the word, it's probably because your habitual perceptual frame leads you to expect words on white paper to be written in black ink. So as long as you use this frame to interpret the situation, you will not see the word fly. In this case, fly is written in white. You must be able to reframe your perception in order to see it. The same is true in life. Many times there are opportunities all around for us to make our lives exactly as we wish them to be. There are ways to see our biggest problems as our greatest opportunities if only we can step out of our trained patterns of perception. Again, as we've discussed over and over in this book, nothing in the world has any inherent meaning. How we feel about something and what we do in the world are dependent upon our perception of it. A signal has meaning only in the frame or context in which we perceive it. Misfortune is a point of view. Your headache may feel good to an aspirant salesman. Human beings tend to attach specific meanings to experiences. We say this happened, so this means that, when in actuality there may be an infinite number of ways to interpret any experience. We tend to frame things based upon how we have perceived them in the past. Many times, by changing these habitual perception patterns, we can create greater choices for our lives. It's important to remember that perceptions are creative. That is, if we perceive something as a liability, that's the message we deliver to our brain. Then the brain produces states that make it the reality. If we change our frame of reference by looking at the same situation from a different point of view, we can change the way we respond in life. We can change our representation or perception about anything and in a moment change our states and behaviors. This is what reframing is all about. Remember, we do not see the world as it is because how things are can be interpreted from many points of view. How we are, our frames of reference, our maps define the territory. For example, take a look at figure A. What do you see? Of course you see an old, ugly woman. Take a look at figure B. As you can see, this is a drawing of a similar ugly old woman, with her chin buried in her fur coat. Look at it carefully and try to figure out what kind of old woman she is. Is she happy or sad? What do you think she's thinking about? Yet there's something interesting about this old woman. The artist who drew it claims it's a drawing of her pretty young daughter. If you change your frame of reference, you should be able to see this beautiful young woman. Here's some help. The old woman's nose becomes the chin and jawline of the younger woman's face. The older woman's left eye becomes the younger woman's left ear. The older woman's mouth becomes a necklace around the younger woman's neck. If you still have difficulty, I'll provide you with a drawing that will help you pull it out. Take a look at figure C. The obvious question is, why did you see the ugly old woman in figure B, instead of the beautiful young girl? The answer: you were conditioned in advance to see the old woman. Many times in my seminars I will show half the group figure A and half the group figure C, then I will show them the composite drawing of figure B. When the two groups begin to interact with each other, arguments will often break out over who is right. Those who saw A first have difficulty seeing the young woman, and vice versa for those who saw C first. It is important to note that our past experiences regularly filter our ability to see what is really happening in the world. But there are multiple ways to see or experience any situation. The entrepreneur who buys advance tickets to a concert and then sells them at a higher price at the gate can be seen as a despicable person who takes advantage of others, or he can be seen as adding value to those who could not get tickets or did not want to wait in line. The key to success in life is to consistently represent your experience in ways that support you in producing even greater results for yourself and others. If you see what is small as it sees itself, and accept what is weak for what strength it has, and use what is dim for the light it gives, then all will go well. This is called acting naturally. Lao Tzu, Tao. Taking reframing in its simplest form is changing a negative statement into a positive one by changing the frame of reference used to perceive the experience. There are two major types of reframes, or ways to alter our perception about something: context reframing and content reframing. Both alter your internal representations by resolving internal pain or conflict, therefore putting you in a more resourceful state. Context reframing involves taking an experience that seems to be bad, upsetting, or undesirable and showing how the same behavior or experience is actually a great advantage in another context. Children's literature is filled with examples of context reframing. Rudolph's nose, which made people make fun of him, was actually an advantage and made him a hero in the context of a dark and snowy night. The ugly duckling suffered great pain because he was so different, but his difference was his beauty as a full-grown swan. Context reframing is invaluable in business. A mismatching partner was a liability until we realized after the brainstorming process that he could be a great asset as a backup, as the one to note in advance any potential problems. Great innovations are made by those who know how to reframe activities and problems into potential resources in other contexts. For example, oil was once considered something that destroyed the value of land for crop usage. Yet look at its value today. Several years ago, lumber yards had difficulty disposing of large amounts of waste sawdust from their mills. One guy took that waste and decided to put it to use in another context. He pressed it together with glue and lighter fluid and created something called Presto logs. After contracting to take away all the worthless sawdust from these mills, in 2 years he developed a multimillion-dollar business, with his major resource costing him nothing. But that's all an entrepreneur is: someone who endows resources with new wealth-producing capacity. In other words, someone who is an expert reframer. Content reframing involves taking the exact same situation and changing what it means. For example, you might say your son never stops talking. He never shuts up. After content reframe, you might say that he certainly must be a very intelligent young man to have so much to say. There's the story of a famous army general who was known to have reframed his troops during a heavy enemy attack by saying, "We're not retreating, we're just advancing in another direction." When a person close to us dies, most people in our culture are sad. Why? Many reasons: feelings of loss, for instance. Yet some people are joyous. Why? They reframe death to mean that the deceased is always with them, that nothing in the universe is ever destroyed, that things just change form. Some consider death as graduation to a higher level of existence, so they are joyous. Another kind of content reframe is to actually change the way you see, hear, or represent a situation. If you're upset about what someone said to you, you may envision yourself smiling as he says the same negative words expressed in the tonality of your favorite singer. Or you may see the same experience in your brain, only this time with the speaker surrounded by your favorite color. Or you may even change what he says to you in the first place. As you re-experience it in your mind, you may hear him apologize to you. Or you could see him speaking to you from a perspective that puts you very high above him. Reframing the same stimulus changes the meaning sent to the brain and thus the states and behaviors associated with it. This book is full of reframes. The 7 Lies of Success is a whole chapter of reframes. Almost any seemingly negative experience can be reframed into a positive. How often have you said, "Someday I'll probably look back and laugh at this"? Why not look back and laugh at it now? It's all a matter of perspective. It's important to note that you can reprogram someone's representation through swish patterns and other techniques, but if the person gets greater benefits from the older behavior than from the new choices he has developed, he will probably return to the old behavior. For example, if I work with a woman with an unexplainable numb foot and find out what she does in her head and physiology to create it, and she then learns to signal her body in a way that no longer creates numbness, her problem is now cleared up. But it may return when she goes home if she no longer gets the great secondary benefits she had when her foot was numb, such as her husband's doing the dishes, paying attention to her, massaging her feet, and so on. For the first couple of weeks or months, he's thrilled that she no longer has the problem. However, after a while, since she no longer has the problem, he not only expects her to start doing the dishes, but he doesn't massage her feet, and he seems to pay even less attention to her. Soon her problem flares back up mysteriously. She doesn't do this consciously. To her unconscious mind, the old behavior works much better in giving her what she wants, and wham, her Foot's numb again. In such a case, she must find other behaviors that will give her the same quality of experience with her husband. She must get more from the new behavior than she did from the past behavior. In one of my trainings, a woman who had been blind for 8 years seemed unusually adept and centered. I later discovered that she was not blind at all. Yet she lived her life as if she were. Why? Well, she'd had an accident earlier in her life and developed poor eyesight. As she did, people around her gave her a tremendous amount of love and support, more than she had ever experienced before in her life. In addition, she began to discover that even doing average everyday things brought her great recognition when people thought she was blind. They treated her as special, so she maintained this behavior, even convincing herself of her blindness at times. She had not found a more powerful way to get people to automatically respond to her in a thoughtful and loving way. Even strangers would treat her as special. The behavior would change only if she developed something bigger to move away from or something that gave her more benefits than her present behavior offered. So far we've been concentrating on the ways in which we can reframe negative perceptions into positive ones. But I don't want you to think of reframing as a therapy, as a way of going from situations you consider bad to ones you consider good. Reframing is really nothing more or less than a metaphor for potential and possibility. There are very few things in your life that can't be reframed into something better. One of the most important frames to consider is possibilities. We often fall into ruts. We might be getting comfortable results, but we could be getting spectacular results. So please do this exercise. Make a list of 5 things you're doing right now that you're pretty pleased with. They could be relationships that are going well, something at work, maybe something having to do with your children or your finances. Now imagine them as even better. Spend a few minutes thinking about it. You'll probably surprise yourself by finding ways your life could be dramatically improved. Possibility reframing is something we can all do. All it takes is the mental flexibility to be alert for potential and the personal power to take action. Let me add a final thought that applies to everything in this book. Reframing is another effective skill that you can pull out of your mental tool chest to produce greater results. Think of it in the broader sense as an ongoing process of exploring assumptions and finding useful contexts for what you do well. Leaders and all other great communicators are masters of the art of reframing. They know how to motivate and empower people by taking anything that happens and making it a model for possibility. There's a famous story told about Tom Watson, the founder of IBM. One of his subordinates had made a horrendous mistake that had cost the company $10 million. He was called into Watson's office and said, "I suppose you want my resignation." Watson looked at him and said, "Are you kidding? We just spent $10 million educating you. There's a valuable lesson in everything that happens. The best leaders are the ones who learn the lesson and put the most empowering frame on outside events." That works for politics, business, teaching, and your home life as well. We all know people who are reverse reframers. No matter how bright the silver lining, they can always find a dark cloud. But for every disabling attitude, for every counterproductive behavior, there's an effective reframe. You don't like something, change it. You're behaving in a way that doesn't support you. Do something else. There's a way to not just produce effective behaviors, but make sure they're available when we need them. We'll learn how to retrigger any useful behavior the moment we desire it in the next chapter, when we look at ways of